Hey guys, welcome back. It's been about a week since I've actually been working on this properly. I've done a few little bits and bobs during the evenings throughout the last week or so just to update the arrangement and get everything sounding good. I've got it to a place now where I'm really liking the sound of it, so I thought I'd take you through what I've done, the updates to the arrangement, and because I'm kind of new to this kind of string arrangement stuff in Logic as well, I'm more of like a rock and roll song kind of producer. I thought I'd give you some hints and tips as to how you can really bring these string sounds to life and get them sound more realistic. There's just a few kind of small things you can do that I think is really helpful, so I'll take you through some of that as well. So this is the full song all laid out in Logic here. So we've got our piano at the top, we've got our cello, which is just one track all the way through. There's a couple of violas, a couple of violin tracks, actually 4 violin tracks, so kind of like 2 violin A and 2 violin B tracks. So I just went for a slightly different sound on this track versus this track, and likewise this track versus this track here, which is why they're separated out. And similarly for the viola, when you bring up Logic strings, you can have sort of different types of viola sound, be it bowed or plucked and things like that. So this viola sound has got a different sort of patch on it compared to this one. Okay, so just a few little production tips and overview here. So the piano sounds as if you are sat at the piano. So the low notes on the piano are towards the left and the high notes are on your right hand side. And that's basically how it's gonna sound in your headphones or on speakers as well. So in my left headphone, you get more of the low notes, and in my right headphone, you're gonna get more of the high notes. So with that in mind, with the cello here, just in terms of how I'm positioning it, I'm just positioning it slightly right of center because I don't want the low notes of the cello to compete too much with the low notes of the piano. So just doing little separations like that can really help bring out each instrument overall. Conversely, with the viola, I've done a slight pan to the left. Viola's slightly higher in register, especially compared to the cello, so it doesn't compete that much or quite as much with the low notes of the piano. So to have an overall sort of balance, whereas I've panned the cello slightly right, I've panned the viola slightly to the left. And then when it comes to the violins, I've just done hard pan left for one violin and hard pan right for the other violin. So like I said, there's actually 2 tracks for each one. So these 2 are panned left and these 2 are panned to the right. So as I've mentioned before, there are different types of sounds when it comes to things like Logic strings or whatever DAW you're working with. They'll have their own kind of variation of this. So normally I use just typical like sustain notes when it comes to working with strings, but there are a few different options. So with this viola here, I actually used this articulation, so you get different sort of sounds for each instrument. So this is the one I normally use, just classic like sustain notes. You can get sort of plucked sounds and things like that as well as like a tremolo and various different things. But for this particular part, this fortepiano slow worked really, really well, and it provided that swell up and bringing up the volume for each kind of note that was played on the instrument, which in the chorus section just gave it this really nice swell and lifted the whole song. So always play around with that. So one thing that I tend to do to help make these string parts sound a bit more realistic is to make sure that there is at least a slight overlap between each note in the MIDI data. So if we take a look here at the cello, and we can just zoom in here, we'll see that you can drag how this is gonna, how long the note is gonna play, and I always make sure there's a little bit of an overlap between the end of one note and the start of the other. Sometimes when a note can come in with these sort of emulated sounds or pre-recorded type of sounds, it can sound a little bit harsh, so having a little bit of overlap can help with that. Another thing I do similar to that is that I play around with the volume automation a lot. So there's 2 key things that I always do. So if we take a look at this violin track here, you can see that there's a fair little bit of volume automation going on. So one thing that I will do generally is that I will have volume swells for the notes. So often when you're playing a bowed instrument, there is a bit of a increase in volume and a swell as you start to play the note. So here we can see that for each of these MIDI notes here, I've got a bit of a swell as well as a bit of a volume dip as the next note starts. So that gives it a swell for each of those notes to give it that nice sort of building and rising and falling sound. The second thing I do is that when you're playing a bowed instrument like a violin, the sound is not going to be totally linear the whole time like a MIDI note might suggest. So as well as increasing the volume and doing swells like that, the volume will actually waver quite a lot as well. So what I tend to do is I actually map the volume automation for one of these stringed instruments to an external controller. This is what I mean over here. So over here on my keyboard, I've got a couple of controls that I can use to do things like the volume automation in Logic. If you've got a keyboard, there's a good chance that you've got some sort of pitch wheel or a modulation wheel like this, or even just like a volume fader that you could use to get the same effect. So you can see in Logic, as I move the wheel here, it changes the volume on the track. And then if you set the track to record when you do this, you can also then save the automation. This can save you a lot of time putting in all those automation points. So in terms of the workflow that I would go through, I would start off with automating the volume using that controller on my keyboard, and then I would come through and make some fine adjustments to make sure that there's, good sounding swells to the notes where I want them, and making slight dips in the volume between the notes to help it sound a bit more natural. In terms of the piano production, I've not done anything particularly groundbreaking. I think this piano, this Easy Keys piano from Toontrack sounds pretty decent as it is. I've taken off the hammer noise. You can play around with the sort of the room size and therefore what kind of reverb you might be getting from this piano. So that's all pretty stock. And then I've got a compressor on just to take away some of those harsher hits, particularly in the chorus. And then that's pretty much it. I'm just using this 1073 to adjust the overall volume if I need it. In terms of reverb, again, the strings sound really good with reverb, and because this is a song for a wedding, I'm trying to emulate that sound of a church. So I've used the Waves TrueVerb here, started off with the Cathedral preset, and I've changed the room size and a few parameters quite significantly, but I've basically put the same reverb on all of the strings and I've just changed the pre-delay. That can kind of give it the impression that you're all sat in the same room, you're all sat in the same church, but these instruments are coming at you from slightly different directions or distances. So on my master channel here, I've just got this EQ. So we've got a little bit of a cut at the low end to get rid of some of that harshness that you might find in the low side of the piano. We've got a slight boost to the low mids, a boost to the high mids, and then the high frequency channels basically off. And also on the master bus, I've got this J37, which is a Waves tape emulation. So this is a really, really cool plugin that I use on a lot of my songs. In this example here, because we've got piano, we've got strings, I just want this to sound really, really warm and together. The tape emulation kind of can help glue the tracks together a little bit to make it sound a bit more cohesive. You can add a little bit of tape saturation too, which can kind of help give it that warmth. And then you can play around with this noise level as well, just to give it that kind of low background fizz that I think sounds really, really cool. Sounds like you're listening to it on tape, which is quite cool. So there we go. I hope you've enjoyed watching this song come to life. It's been a fun project for me to work on, and I hope to be working on more things like this in the future. So stay tuned, like and subscribe for more. And now, here's the final version of the song. I hope you like it. Let me know what you think, and I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.